Hello, and welcome to the Earthly Roots podcast,
where we chat all things gardening, homesteading, and connecting to nature.
We're your hosts, Diane and Robyn.
The Earthly Roots podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. All right, welcome back to another episode.
Hello.
My name is Robyn.
And I'm Diane. We don't introduce ourselves enough, do we?
No, we don't. Although I feel like it's kind of in our intro. We have a little bit of an introduction, but yeah, we wanted to say hello again. So hello.
Yes, we're here, we're back.
Yeah, welcome back to the Earthly Roots podcast. We have a really awesome episode planned for today where we're going to be chatting all about permaculture.
Yeah, I'm so excited to cover it. Although I feel like the two of us, we're huge fans, but we're also kind of skeptics of permaculture as a word and a movement because it tends to be something we do naturally in our garden anyways. But it is something that once you start connecting it, as far as the way that we both garden, it closely resembles permaculture. And so it'd be cool to chat through.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so we thought we'd kind of chat about what it is. Annie's going to join. We have some animals always around in the podcast. So if you hear some meows, it's Annie. It's her birthday today. So happy birthday, Annie.
We should call it Earthly Roots and Paws.
Yeah, that's cute. But yeah, anyway, we thought we would chat about permaculture, all of the different principles of what makes up permaculture, because although it is a very, in my opinion, it's quite a loosely used term to describe a style of living, really, because it's not just gardening.
Yeah.
There are certain principles that make up the word permaculture that we thought we'd kind of chat through, and then how we use that in our gardens or in our lives, whether we kind of agree with all of the points, and just have
which ones are hard and which ones are easy to get into. Because you and I both live very frugal lifestyles, and so a lot of the time permaculture might consist of bringing in systems that eventually make things easier in the garden, but you need to have the costs there to begin with to actually be able to introduce those things in the garden and implement them. And so there could be things missing in our gardens and yet they'll still be thriving, or they could potentially be just like simmering, and the boiling point is once we bring those things in. So it'll be cool to talk about it and unpack it all.
Whereabouts did you, or when was the time when you first heard about permaculture?
So I actually heard of it quite early on in our journey, like when we were still researching yurts and what type of lifestyle we were going to go into. And we knew we wanted to homestead, but we also knew we didn't want to use chemicals. We wanted to make sure that what we started doing, because we were so new to it all, wasn't so hard and overwhelming. And I think that's where permaculture played a really big part in that when we introduce like a diverse range of animals and plants all together, we can essentially do all the jobs easier, because we got pigs early on in our homesteading journey because we knew they could till the ground for us. And we got chickens nice and early as well because we knew the power of them, not only tilling but also being able to help us with compost and managing bugs in the garden as well. So I feel like at the beginning of our homesteading journey, permaculture was like the thing we did. Like you saw it in every aspect of our gardening. And now over time, like it's there, but now the systems kind of like live and do their things themselves. We're not introducing new things as much.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
Yeah, well, it's kind of all about establishing all of those systems, which permaculture is a very systems-based approach to living your life and gardening. Yeah,
and making it better for the people involved as well as the land involved.
Yeah, I first heard about it actually at university. I was doing this course where it was kind of like we did a tour of, I don't know, around Brisbane and out west, and the course was land management and land use management. So we went around to all of these different types of farms, ways of living, and we went to the Crystal Waters Eco Village or Permaculture Village on the Sunshine Coast.
Cool.
And that's where I kind of first heard about it. I suppose I'd heard about it a little bit growing up, with mum talking about it some of the time. But yeah, I went to the Eco Village, and I think that's where Morag Gamble lives.
Oh,
as
wow.
well.
That would have been incredible.
Yeah, we didn't get to meet her, but that kind of going to Crystal Waters inspired me to look into it a little bit more, and then found out about all of the great permaculture teachers out there. And it was really interesting to go to this community that was just in a little valley and was so green, so beautiful. There was these houses there, but you couldn't really see the houses because it was just enveloped in greenery and like a forest with creeks running through it. People were growing their own food, flowers. They had like a dairy cow, and it was just this community that was living together in a way that I hadn't really seen before. Very different to the city, coming out and then seeing these people in a fairly small area like living together.
And I mean, that would have been normal once upon a time. Like, there's so many communities in the past that the way they would have lived would have been with each other. Like, they needed one another, because as one person, you can't possibly be expected to do everything. Like, it's going to get overwhelming. And so the more you can harness the power of other people in your community, animals, plants, doing work together as well, like the way that a forest would look after itself, I think it's it's a powerful way of making sure that your garden is sustainable throughout your life, as opposed to just being a thriving garden for one season and then way too much work the next.
Yeah. And also kind of having that bit more of a connection with nature as well, rather than just, having one piece of land and farming it again and again and again just for the produce.
Yeah.
You're instead giving back to the land and inviting nature in, inviting animals to then do that job for you of pest management, disease management, and really replicating what a functioning ecosystem is outside in your own garden.
Yeah, you're living with the land instead of just using the land for your own purpose and then throwing it out like a disposable thing.
Yeah, so I have the definition, or one of the definitions of what permaculture is. So I thought we'd talk about that.
And just before you say it, to all our listeners that are listening on YouTube, or even those that are able to review, let us know what your definition of permaculture is. Like, before you listen to something that's on the internet, what does it look like in your garden? What does it mean to you? When someone asks you, what is permaculture, what would you say?
Yeah, so there's multiple different definitions, obviously. I'm looking at the Permaculture Research Institute website. And so permaculture kind of stemmed from the 70s when it was a big permaculture movement, where I think it was Bill Mollison and David Holmgren were two leaders in creating this concept. So yeah, they were kind of two guys who pioneered the movement, I suppose. And the definition that I have here, that is permaculture, is the conscious design and maintenance of agriculturally productive ecosystems, which have the diversity, stability, and resilience of natural ecosystems. So like we were saying, kind of replicating the processes and systems that happen in nature in your own garden. Because if you think about a thriving ecosystem, which is functioning well, it just happens naturally. There's no intervention with humans or anything else. Everything's in balance and it just happens. It's only when we have things like, human intervention or climate change or something like that, then things do change and become unbalanced.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that there's been hundreds of years of people coming in and doing whatever they want to the landscape, that now we're having to kind of reverse those systems that we've put in place and make them more natural in a way. And so that's where it becomes something we have to design and plan to be able to implement. But in reality, permaculture does just take into account, what does nature actually want to look like, what works well out in nature, and how can we then bring that back to our gardens.
Yeah.
Because it's not natural. You don't go out into a forest and literally see like garden beds and
No,
just
that's-
vegetables growing in perfect rows. That's
Exactly.
not normal.
No, but yeah, there's certain ways that you can replicate all of those amazing things that happen in nature in your garden.
Yeah.
That I think would be really cool to chat through today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So we're kind of going to cover each permaculture principle today and talk about how we've implemented it in our garden, what it looks like, maybe even like ways we would move forward into making it happen more in our garden, or whether we even agree or disagree with it.
Yeah.
So first permaculture
Sounds
principle.
good. Yeah. So all of these principles, I suppose, they were created by David Holmgren, and who was the co-originator of the permaculture concept alongside Bill Mollison. And so he created these 12 permaculture principles to help everyone like shift their mindset to a more holistic kind of actionable steps, I suppose.
And some people need steps. Like some of us are really good at just kind of winging it and seeing what happens and experimenting. And some of us really thrive with having a bit of instruction. And so I think that's where the permaculture principles are really useful in giving you those first steps of where to begin when you're feeling just a whole lot of overwhelm of where to start.
Yeah, so it's really good if you're creating a garden or if you're looking to buy land.
Yeah.
It's great to just have these principles in your mind, which you might already. So that's why we'll chat through them.
And that's where I'm saying, like, at the beginning of our homesteading journey, like 3 years ago when we first moved onto the block, the 12 principles were like right in our brains.
Definitely.
Because that's where we needed to start. That's where we felt comfortable to begin.
Yeah. Yeah, but you don't need to apply all of them at the same time. So keep that in mind.
At any time.
Exactly. Yeah. So the first one, principle number 1, is a big one. It's to observe and interact.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something that we have both done. And this says to take the time to engage with nature. And when you do that, you can design different solutions that suit your particular situation. So this is where you can't just grab a book and read what to do. You really have to be proactive yourself and sit and observe the landscape and all of the different seasons. I think usually people say about a year or so, just to observe, not do anything too drastic before you create what you want.
Yeah, and in this time, you're going to see where the sun sets, rises, the direction that it goes over your garden. So you'll be able to see the spots that will get the most morning sun, the most afternoon sun, the ones that will dry out, the ones that will be covered in shade the whole time. And this will help you to figure out what plants you can plant. You'll also see the way that water moves through your land. And I know for both of us, especially with the last 2 years with all the extra rains, we really got to see just where the areas that swamp up are and where the water just kind of like washes over things and moves things out of its way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think sunlight, water, soil, and just temperature are 4 big things that you can really create your own diary of over the year and just see what happens, what fluctuates at different times. It's not only important for the garden, but also if you're building a house or any kind of structures, it's important to know all of these. And this is a big thing about permaculture is designing houses in a way that really suits the landscape, which I feel like a lot of us have just lost that, I don't know, initiative or just
Patience.
knowledge. Yeah. Knowledge about how nature works around us when we want to build a house. A lot of people aren't thinking about sun direction and wind direction and temperature when they build a house. It's more just like, what can we fit on this block of land that we
Where's
have?
the best view?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I feel like the house that we're living in right now, which is rented, was more so like the thought process was, where's the view?
Yeah.
Because if I was to design that house in another way, like a lot of the time we're not getting sunlight. Actually, sunlight's okay in that house, to be honest, but the garden wasn't thought out in where the best position for the garden would be, because where the house sits right now is where I would have the garden and I would have the house further down because it's creating a lot of shade in areas that I wouldn't want it to.
Yeah.
But another thing with observing and interacting, if you're like me and you're impatient and you just want to start, another thing that you can observe and interact, like you said, don't put in any perennial plants to begin with, or trees and really drastic things. Start with some of your annuals and just observe and interact with the bug life in your gardens and what seeds and plants grow in different seasons. Because a lot of the time there's the seed guides online that tells you, like, you know, at autumn time you should be planting broccoli and cabbage and blah and blah and blah. But when you actually go to plant those things in your garden, like, they might not germinate.
Yeah.
They might take an extra month before they actually do anything. They might completely get destroyed by bugs in your climate. You might get frost in an area that you didn't expect it to be in. So you can still experiment with planting as well and just note down what you notice so that the next year it's more successful and you can make those changes you need.
Yeah, no, they're really good points. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a big one. And yeah, something that we're both doing and both learning and
continuing to.
Exactly. Yeah. It doesn't just take a year to observe your landscape. We're constantly observing and looking at change. And
So based on something that you observed in your garden, what's something that you have implemented?
So for us, it's probably one of the main things was water, where the water goes. And then we use that to design the direction of the garden beds. So we kind of have created like the pathways so that they act as mini swales to catch the water in the flower farm. So they're kind of parallel to the slope, if that makes sense.
So it means that the water comes to them,
exactly,
fills up the swale, moves down.
Yeah, so that the water isn't just completely rushing all the way down to the end of the property. We want to capture as much as we can as it flows naturally down.
Brilliant.
And then where those areas that we do have a lot of water down the end of the property, that's where we've planted more like trees and natives that really thrive well in those conditions.
Yeah, and I remember your advice when I was saying on our property we had some swampy areas. Your advice was really impactful, was go down to the wetlands in your area and have a look at the vegetation that's growing there. That's what you should introduce. Like, that's brilliant.
Yeah, because there'll always be trees around and plants that you can find inspiration from to then grow, and you won't have to take care of them that well because they'll just grow well. Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah.
One thing that we did as well, so we had our small garden beds to begin with, and then after we observed and took the time to notice where the sun positioning was, how the trees in the area affected the shadows that were cast, we were then able to go and start implementing the best spot for our big gardens, which now house most of our crops for summertime.
Nice.
All right, the next permaculture principle, let's talk about catching and storing energy.
Yes.
Because I feel like this one is more suited to when you have a permanent home, in my opinion. I feel like this is one that I haven't been able to delve into as much while at a rental. In some aspects I have, but not all.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, one of them I suppose could also be the water. So making sure that we're capturing that water where we want it to be. Another one is also soil retention, so capturing all of the different nutrients that we can, even in the forms of like green manure, capturing that from the atmosphere and turning that into a plant to then go into the soil.
Compost as well. Getting all the foliage, all the dead plants, all the old tomatoes that are rotting away on the ground, put that all in the compost pile with some wood chips.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's not just like solar energy and capturing that, which I think is a big part of this principle, collecting resources that are abundant in nature, which everywhere has the sun. So of course that's a big one. We don't have solar here, and it's probably, I don't know whether we'll do that or not here. It's probably just not feasible for a long-term situation as it is for a lot of places, but I know you're looking into doing that with the bus.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, and that's what I mean, that the bus for us is permanent. Like the bus is ours to do with as we like, so putting in solar is important for us. Eventually when we park up the bus in its permanent place, we want to create a gutter system to capture rainwater. Right now on our property, we do have rainwater, and so that's captured on the roof. So yeah, like as far as designing a home, there's a lot of things that you can do for capturing water to drink, sunlight for energy. But you're right that in the garden, there is a lot of ways that we still capture things as well. And using what we have is
I
part
think,
of that.
and I think it's kind of off topic. Well, it's not off topic, but with permaculture, it's not just the physical things as well. So permaculture is all about community.
Yeah.
And this principle, this is where I
Capture your
mean,
community.
well, exactly. This, like the principles are so broad, you can really take them, to whatever you really desire or need. But it does apply to community as well, like capturing knowledge and help around you.
Yeah, learning how to ask for help when you need it or offer it if you have something to teach as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a very broad principle in my opinion, but my mind does go to things like solar and water.
Me too.
But if you can't physically do that, there's so many other ways that you can be using things that are abundant in nature. Even going foraging and things like that applies to this principle. Yeah.
Which actually down our road, we have so many fruit trees. So we planted fruit trees on our property. This was probably the last thing we started to plant out. But they're not going to give us a yield in a very long time. And so being able to just go down the road when the peaches are ripe or the apples are ripe, talk to our neighbours and ask them for a bit of fruit as well. And it's been so fun to just pick them and turn them into something incredible.
Yeah, they look amazing.
Yes.
I would love that one day.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Well, speaking of yield, the next principle is to obtain a yield. So this means that you are ensuring that you're actually getting the useful rewards that you've put the work in for. And that's kind of going back to another podcast that we did all about preserving and actually doing something with things that are abundant.
Not just letting them go to waste. Yeah.
Which, it is hard when it's super busy and you've got so many things going on. But, it is super important.
But even if you're eating it, like it just goes back to when you're planning your garden, when you're putting things in place, plant the things you actually eat. Like don't plant, I don't know, like in my garden, I'm not going to go planting, like Swiss chard or kale because I don't eat those things in abundance. Like I might plant a plant and give it a go
Didn't you
and
plant
try
Swiss
it out.
chard the other day?
I don't think I did. Silver beet I did. And that's where I'm saying, like, I still trial things out, but I'm not going to plant it in abundance until I've tasted it and gone, yes, I like this thing. I'm not going to, like, even there's certain root crops that I'm just not a fan of. Like, I would never plant a mandarin tree or like a citrus tree because I know that I can go to a neighbor and they're overwhelmed by citrus. So why would I take the time to plant it in my garden, give it the space, give it the time if I'm not going to harvest it for its fruit?
Yeah, true.
Like there's only so many oranges I'm going to eat.
Yeah. Yeah, true. I think a big part of this principle is about living with the seasons. Yeah. So eating seasonally and actually changing your diet as the seasons change rather than just relying on what's available in large supermarkets, connecting with local farmers a little bit more to really understand what is growing at that time of the year. You're going to be digesting a lot more nutrients from that if it's really fresh and grown locally, and it's probably going to be a bit cheaper, and it's just fun to kind of change up your meals throughout the year rather than eating spaghetti bolognese every week, which is delicious, don't get me wrong.
I can never get sick of spaghetti bolognese.
I know, but we can branch out.
Yeah.
We can add different veggies into it.
Yeah,
throughout
and
the year.
obtaining a yield too doesn't have to be something edible. It can be a yield like with your flower farm of flowers that you can then sell as a business or have to beautify your home or whatever else. It's also obtaining a yield of green manure to improve your soils or creating shade and being able to, it's not an edible yield, but the shade that a beautiful tree casts or creates a space for you is also something that you're then gaining back from that hard work.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. The next one is an interesting one. Principle 4. It says, apply self-regulation and accept feedback. So this is about...
I love that.
Yeah. It's about, this says that we need to discourage inappropriate activity to ensure that systems can continue to function well. So you could kind
What's
of think
an
of
inappropriate activity?
well, I know. I suppose you could either think of this one as a physical, like in the garden activity, or a social activity as well.
Ah,
Yeah.
fair enough. Yeah. So like if you plant out a whole garden and then plan a trip for 3 months overseas, like are you really thinking about your garden and the hard work that you need to put in?
Yeah. Yeah. And also just if you do something wrong in the garden, rather than assuming that you're right and, you know, or just not accepting the feedback, this is all about accepting that things could be better or could be different, open to a little bit of change and knowledge from other people is always, it's a hard thing to take some of the time, but if it's done in a nice way, then it's fine. I know some of the comments that I get on YouTube are a little bit like, not rude, but just, I don't know
Not
what's the
thoughtful of your
word.
feelings.
Yeah, like I'm not after the opinions there and then.
Yeah, that is tough. Like when you do share your life like we do online for other people to see and interact with, it's really difficult because what we experiment with in our gardens or try out might not be what other people would do, especially those that have gardens for a while. And I think it's so easy as humans to offer our opinions and feedback without being asked. And in a way, that's really powerful because when you're ready to accept that information, it can be really useful at the right time.
Yeah.
But it is all about tone and the way you say things, because at the end of the day, we're all trialing things out.
Yeah.
And there's going to be mistakes and things that we do really well. And that's where that feedback comes into play that, you know, this thing didn't go right. What are some other approaches that I can work towards?
Yeah. That's where I think community is important about with the permaculture concept. It's a massive thing. Community is one of the major foundations of permaculture, and talking to people, changing the way you act, some things in the garden is really important. I still don't really understand what they mean by inappropriate activity. But
no naked gardening, everyone.
Well, what's wrong with that?
No bare feet? No, I'm kidding.
No, you need
would
to do
hate
that. Yeah. Like I'd think of this one as quite political some of the times.
Yeah.
Like I do see a lot of permaculture groups also very strongly politically aligned, and we won't get into too much politics for this chat. We had a conversation before. We're not interested in that. Seriously, we got other stuff to do in the garden, but it is important though, and I think there is this kind of association with permaculture to a very kind of greeny party like group. Not saying names, just saying colours. But that's just how it is, and you know there are certain ways of living that I think a lot of permaculture groups will lean towards. And I mean, it was associated in the 70s with a lot of hippie groups, which is the truth. That's just what happened.
I was going to say this principle really does sound like it fits more towards the human side of a garden rather than the plant side of things. It's about, you know, when you're living with other people, being respectful of one another, like we talked about, like accepting feedback and giving feedback, but knowing when the appropriate time is and how to approach it. Because at the end of the day, you want to savor the relationships you have with others and help those to thrive and to grow like things in the garden too, without hindering them or creating really uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, but then again, in my opinion, like going to someone and saying, oh, this is wrong, like have a look at permaculture, if they're really not open to learning and education and wanting to change their ways, that then would be inappropriate behavior.
Yeah.
So I think there's a fine line, and I think some people in the permaculture community are very strong-minded, and that's why some of the groups get a little bit of a bad rap, in my personal opinion. But I think you do need to have just people open to learning and open to changing the way they garden and, you know, not use sprays and things like that, rather than just coming at them with this information.
Yeah. And I found, at least in my relationship with Sam, because when you live with other people, you automatically kind of assume that when you come home, you can unload your problems onto them because you need to get it off your brain. But we've started doing this thing where we ask, like, you know, I have a lot on my mind and I want to share it. Are you ready to hear it, or like,
Yeah.
can I share it? Like asking for that permission so that you're allowing the other person to be in the right mental space to take on the load of the information you're going to give them. Because if you're just assuming that your partner is always there to listen, you're not always going to get that. You're not going to get their full attention, and that can lead to a lot of frustration on your part. So it's just coming back to just asking, can I unload this onto you?
Yeah.
Principle number five. Can I read it out?
You can do it. Yeah.
All right. Is to use and value renewable resources and services. So make the best use of nature's abundance to reduce our consumption and dependence on non-renewable resources. I feel like this one links really well with catch and store energy.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of even can see it with the one before as well, by discouraging inappropriate activity, which is a lot of fossil fuels.
Yeah. So what are some of the resources that you collect from other sources?
Yeah. Well, all of the nutrients from the garden, I'm trying to just be self-sufficient in fertilizers eventually. That's the goal, in the form of making compost and green manure. So I'm making the most of the sun and the atmosphere, and having plants do the work for me in terms of adding nutrients that I'm deficient in with the soil, like with the buckwheat and green manure crop. It helps with phosphorus, so I'm using that. I don't then have to go and buy something that's high in phosphorus to add to the soil. What else am I doing?
I was going to say, today you and I went down to the garden centre where you dropped off your flowers, which, by the way, Robyn's selling flowers left, right and centre. She's doing so well, and I'm so proud.
Oh, thanks.
But we actually collected some coffee grounds that they were throwing out from the cafe. I collected some cardboard boxes to lay over all the weeds that I'm trying to maintain. So that's all things that we didn't have to go buy weed mats. We didn't have to go buy fertilizer. We were able to take someone else's waste and then put that into our gardens.
Yeah, definitely the tip. And places like that, best place to go for this kind of principle if you want to use services that are out there that are otherwise junk. I know I was kind of fishing in the bins for all the cardboard a few months ago, got a few funny looks, but any permies out there will understand. But there's so many things that you can find at your local tip or just Facebook Marketplace, secondhand things for the garden, pots. Like, don't go out and buy brand new pots. Have a look on Facebook Marketplace first. Even things like, with this, what comes to mind is just creating shade, like outside a window if it's a really sunny position, because you're then using the sunlight and creating shade, so then you don't have to use an aircon or fans and electricity. I would love to have like a grape arbor or something outside on the balcony. That would just be amazing to kind of just create that shade that
and make you want to
in
be
summer.
in that space.
Yeah, and then you get the shade in summer, and then it dies off over winter, so then you get the nice winter sun, and just making the most of that, which is what we're trying to do with the cottage garden.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We've also collected wood chips as well, and there was collecting water is another one of those things too. So it's just really thinking about what you need to make a garden thrive. Seed collecting as well from your own plants, or exchanging them with other people. So if you want different varieties, like I'll give you carrot seeds because I've got them in abundance in exchange for your pea seeds that did really well last season. And using other people around you for their knowledge and their expertise. Asking someone for help with pruning if you don't know how. If anyone knows how to prune, I need help.
I just hack it back like we did with the cosmos the other way. You were being too dainty and too delicate. I was just like, just cut it all.
It just makes me think of my fig tree a few years ago where I cut it like right back, and Sam looked at it and he's like, did you just kill that tree that's been like living here for 10 years? And I'm like, no, they said that's how you do it. And luckily a year later it's thriving again.
Good.
Needs another really good haircut. All right, permaculture number 6.
The next one is to produce no waste.
They're all
absolutely
so
none.
connected.
No waste. This one I don't fully agree with, but
no, okay.
Well, I agree with it, but
it's good. It's
impossible.
good to have opinions both ways.
Yeah,
it's healthy to have opinions both ways.
Exactly. Yeah. yeah, so it's all about by valuing and making use of all the resources that are available to us, nothing goes to waste. And I completely agree with that statement. I do think that producing no waste is incredibly hard. And
It is in a modernized world
yeah.
where we have moved towards waste. Yeah.
Yeah. We're also, I also just want to mention, like, we're incredibly like privileged as well to be like talking about permaculture and all of these things. But a lot of the time, people don't have the money or the interest, or just, it's just impossible to minimize waste some of the time. If you've got kids and you don't have enough time to do like cloth nappies and things like that, I do think it is really impossible. And this is where, as a society, I think we need to change this one. Collectively, individually, it's okay to minimize as much waste, but I know for us, we do our best, but we're still putting the bins out every week, and there's rubbish in there. And now we've got this problem with a lot of recycling not even being recycled in Australia. So that's not on me. Like, I don't make that decision. It's higher up where that also needs to change.
I totally understand that, but I think it's more so like this is where society has gone as far as our waste consumption. Like, plastic has become almost a normal thing, and recycling has always been the solution to it. But now as consumers, we need to kind of shift our thinking from, you know, instead of buying the packet of carrots in the plastic, I'll buy them loose and I'll cut them up myself and put them in a glass jar to store. Well, not a glass jar, like a glass container. But I personally really love this principle of no waste, and I apply it in my garden, especially with my bees. At the moment, like with my bees, when I harvest honey, there's always beeswax left over, and to some, beeswax can be a waste. Even having chickens, you crack the eggs open and the shells can be considered a waste if you just throw it in the bin. But instead, you got to think of these different things as, how can I use them? So eggshells are one of my favorite things because you can grind them up and feed them back to the chickens as calcium. You can grind them up and put them on the garden as snail bait, or like a rough surface for them not to pass. It's nutritious for your garden as well. But then eggshells, along with the beeswax, I actually turn them into firelighters.
Yeah, I saw that the other day. That's so
cool. And I'm so excited. Yeah. So literally awesome. I took eggshells, I took the husks of corn that we had left over from the barbecue as like my kindling in there, and then beeswax to keep it all together. And so instead of going out to the shops and now buying my firelighters, I just chuck that into the fire and off it goes.
I'm interested to see how they work.
Me too.
Yeah.
I'm hyping it up, but I haven't tried it yet. But I mean, I've seen beeswax burn, I've seen the corn husks burn, and I've seen the eggshells burn. So all these things work well together, and it's about just being innovative with what you're using and what you have, and how can I give it new life. I think the saying reuse, repurpose, recycle, I think there's a couple of others that they added to it. I think instead of focusing on recycle, really focus on the other two, reuse and repurpose, because at this point in our consumerism and our lives, those are the two that are going to have the most impact. So those plastic containers that you might buy blueberries or strawberries in, use them to store your food, use them to start seedlings. Like,
there's so many ways to
so many ways. And even like when I go to the shops, I'm sorry, I'm really taking over. I'm really passionate about being waste free.
I can see.
But like when you buy blueberries, so I've shifted as a consumer. I buy blueberries. They're my favorite fruit. They don't grow excellent in my garden, and I use a lot of them. So instead of buying the little punnets of blueberries, which are way too thin to use for seedlings, I'm now buying the freezer packets, but then I'm reusing the packaging and putting in like bananas and freezing those.
Cool. Yeah, nice.
And so I've found a way to, instead of just throw out and create waste with that product, of being able to go full circle and give it a new life.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, and I think that's that way forward with those things.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. There's so many ways we can reduce our waste, and that's what I was nitpicking about this one. Maybe it can be changed to reduce as much as possible, because a statement like produce no waste, for me personally, is impossible, and I know a lot of other people it's impossible. So that's kind of, quite extreme in my opinion. But
It's almost like you're
reducing-
turned off before you've even started because it's such a
Yeah.
big term.
Well, that's just ways that then people get annoyed when someone, you know, tells you that, or you read that and it makes you feel like, oh, well, I do
not doing
produce
enough.
waste. Like I can't produce no waste.
Yeah.
That's where I think some of permaculture can maybe just be a little bit lighter, a little bit nice and
Yeah. And I get
You
what
know
you
what I
mean.
yeah. But I mean, I do love permaculture, so that's not the point of this. But you know, it's a harsh one, but I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even in your garden, like when you cut back certain plants, even the green manures, you're using those as your mulch as opposed to going and bringing in new stuff.
Exactly.
It's just shifting your mind from just consuming. And I think that's why they've made it so like definite, like no
Yeah,
waste.
it's very rigid. Yeah.
It's just to really get you to think about, oh, this is going to cause waste. This thing I can reuse or repurpose
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah.
You really do have to be very conscious of that one. Like
Yeah.
it's
I
really
do-
something you got to put it at the forefront of
I
your
know,
mind.
yeah. I can think of a few people who are like this though. And it's literally everything. Like, I mean, you think about the main thing that we waste, which is like every time we go to the toilet, like
Yeah.
like toilet water is, I can't remember the stats, but it's something ridiculous about how much water goes
Oh,
into
yes, I've heard.
like sewer systems and
Yeah. Just gets flushed away.
yeah. So, I mean, I'd be interested in if anyone has tried like using and making human manure, because that's a big permaculture.
We'll let you know
thing.
soon. I mean, we're going to have a
you're
compost toilet on the bus.
Yeah, compost toilets are really interesting.
Or we're not going to have so it's going to be a dry compost system
Yeah.
where the urine gets separated, because when the two come together is where you've got like the problems and the pathogens happening. As soon as you separate the two out, you've got nitrogen filled water, like high nitrogen, and then you've got a product that over time composted can get rid of all the other pathogens.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was just another thing where it's like, it's hard as a society to say produce no waste when there's systems already
waste
in
happening
place
every
that,
day.
you know, we can't really change that.
Yeah.
I mean, you can if you want, but
It takes money, it takes time, it takes a lot of conscious thought. Yeah, it's
exactly.
a big one.
Yeah. Anyway, so the next one. Do you want to read this out?
Principle number 7.
Yep.
Design from patterns to details. By stepping back, we can observe patterns in nature and society. These can form the backbone of our designs, with the details filled in as we go.
This is an interesting one because you can take it literally or, I don't know.
Loosely.
Yeah.
I
Like,
guess, is the
yeah. And it can apply to so many different things. So for me, what comes to mind, I'm a very logical person. Like, it's just my personality type. I'll always think of logic and take things literally. So, I mean, I think of this literally, like you can take patterns from nature and apply it to your garden to make things easier. So that can be like the way water flows in a landscape, to have a look at an aerial view of an area of land to see how water moves around and apply that in your garden if you want to replicate a creek bed or something like that, or a pond.
You also mentioned before about the spiral garden.
Yeah, or a spiral garden, because I think the photo for this one is, what is it, a spider web?
Yeah, it looks like a spiral web.
We're on milkwood.net, which is a permaculture site, reading these out. But yeah, you can take things like spirals in nature, or the
Fibonacci sequence. Is that seashell shape?
Yeah, I'm not sure what it's called, but yeah. There's so many different shapes in nature that you can replicate in your own garden to either make things easier for you or just create something aesthetic as well. Like, a lot of permaculture gardens have herb spiral gardens, which is a way to kind of build up a garden in a spiral to be able to have easy picking of the herbs and also let the water drain well.
And it looks beautiful. You want to look at it.
Yeah, and entice you to come out into your garden. There's so many benefits of like a herb spiral garden that I would love to do one day. And that is taking a pattern from nature and applying it in your own garden.
But when I think of this principle, and I think it was the spider in the picture that probably prompted me to think of this, is designing based on what you see nature doing anyways. So when you go out into a forest, you see the different levels of the canopy. So you've got the tall trees, the medium trees, the shrubs, the low plants, and then like the ground covers. And so then bringing that into the way that you plant out your garden beds. So a lot of my garden beds are really integrated with things like corn towering over, beans circling their way around them, and then pumpkins sprawling out everywhere. Every now and again, there'll be like pops of onions or carrots popping up as well. And integrating those things together. Or even like the simple fact of leaving mess and plants to die and decay in my garden beds so that bugs like bees, spiders, lizards can hide away within those spaces and help me to control bugs that I don't want there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool one. It's interesting. Yeah.
It's really interesting with permaculture that it always goes back to designing and planning. It's almost like they're making us slow down and really think about the decisions we're about to make and how they're going to look or impact the garden in the future as well.
Yeah, which is pretty much all what a permaculture course is you practice designing a garden, compost systems, all of those systems that you then have in place to just do the work for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty cool.
And it's great. It's keeping in mind that there's also a future. It isn't just the present that you're working in.
Yeah, definitely.
Permaculture number 8. Principle.
So number 8 is to integrate rather than segregate. So yeah, by putting the right things in the right place, relationships develop between them and they support each other.
Yeah, I love this one.
Yeah.
Having animals on our property has been the biggest way that we've integrated things together, or even just the different plantings in one garden. I'm thinking with things like our pigs, when we first started out, like having the pigs in one space, then the chickens coming through that space next, then bringing the compost pile in with the chickens for them to spread it out, moving the chickens on because no longer are they needed in that space, giving them their own area, and then bringing the plants in. We were able to kind of use the interactions of the animals and the plants as we needed them together. But now having things like our border fences, so the fence around our property is an eyesore. It's like barbed wire and it's ugly. But using that to then plant my raspberry plants onto, or my kiwi fruit, or my, I don't know, like things like grapes and passion fruits can also grow on them. And that then becoming a beautiful, almost hedge-like thing for the garden, as opposed to just ugly barbed wire that serves no other purpose than to keep the dogs in and keep things out.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I kind of think for this one, all about biodiversity. So integrating bugs and biodiversity into your own garden to then having that to do the work for you. So in my garden, I have lots of rhubarb at the moment, which actually came from your garden. So
it's looking better in your garden than mine.
Yeah, it's very sad with summer, but I'm actually super happy because we have these little tree frogs, or I think I can't remember the name of them, but they're just really tiny green frogs. There's about 3 of them that I've seen, and they just live on the rhubarb leaves because they're the exact same color as the green leaf. Yeah. And then when they hop onto the red part of the rhubarb, they just look spectacular. Wow. And they're eating all of the bugs for me right now. I didn't put them there. We just had grass there before we even moved here. It was just grass, no plants. I put a little bird bath in to have some water for both birds and the insects and now the frogs. And they've just come here themselves. Like Scott the other day was asking, like, how did they even get here? There's no creeks around or streams around, but they'll naturally find your garden if you have that ecosystem that they also thrive in the wild. So adding lots of different plants, different types of foliage, having a really good understory, and that can be things like rhubarb and then grasses and all different types of like different coloured and different shaped leaves. If you have all of that in your garden, you're going to have a lot of different insects and animals that'll come.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. And how exciting is it to take a walk through your garden and discover these little creatures making home? And
yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. And like all the pollinators that we saw in the garden the other day with the flowers. The bees are loving them.
Yeah.
We saw lots of native ones, and I didn't bring them here. They found them themselves. So nature will naturally be drawn to biodiverse areas. So that's why I always go on about it, but just adding different plants into the garden is the best thing that you can do as, an individual for the planet, I believe, is to just increase biodiversity.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are really fearful of planting lots of things together, because the standard way of planting has always been to have really productive, monoculture?
Yeah.
Poly.
Monoculture
systems where you just have corn growing for ages and ages and ages, and that all depletes the soil of those certain nutrients. That's always been, or for a very long time with the agricultural system, that has been how things have been grown, that people are nervous of how it would affect other plants to grow them beside one another. But surprisingly, having plants grown together contributes to healthier soils, less bug pressure. There's shade for plants that need it, so then they're not getting scorched by the really harsh Australian sun. It just makes sense to plant things together. And if it doesn't work, move things around. Observe, interact, and act.
Yeah. And the best way to start with this, in my opinion, maybe a bit biased, but is by planting flowers. And just start with a simple flower like calendula or marigolds. They're two that grow really quickly and they germinate really easily if you're not used to starting seeds. Those two I would just highly recommend, and just grow maybe 4 plants or so and put them at all different ends of the garden. And then you've just increased biodiversity by a lot. Even just adding a few plants in and amongst other plants is then going to have to get the pollinators to go from those plants to the next one and to travel through your garden, which is then going to increase other activity and bugs, fighting and doing whatever they do. And just create that biodiversity, pollinators, which will bring in other bugs and birds and insects. And
I recently saw a picture. I saw a picture of marigolds that were planted in rows, and in between each row of marigold was a row of cabbage. And so essentially that person had eliminated the cabbage moth from coming into their garden and decimating the cabbage because the marigolds essentially tricked them with their smell. Isn't that amazing?
It's so cool.
I love those innovative ideas of people being this is my problem. What's a natural way that I can solve it instead of just not growing cabbage anymore or putting nets up that don't really quite work in my space? I'm going to use a plant that's going to trick the bugs.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Exactly. Yeah. Problem solved.
Yes. Permaculture principle number 9, I think we're up to, is to use small and slow systems. So small and slow systems are easier to maintain than big ones, making better use of local resources and producing more sustainable outcomes. Yeah. So small and slow.
Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of touched on this one already by just doing things that are manageable for you at that point in time. So whether that be having a worm farm, having a compost system, it's something that I honestly don't have to think about. I just collect all of the food scraps from the kitchen and then I just chuck it into the compost. And that small little step is eventually going to have something beautiful and productive for my garden, but it doesn't take a lot of my energy to do that.
Yeah. I was I feel like we talked about this earlier today as well, is this really applies to the businesses that you and I are pursuing. So I've always said that I love growing my own food for Sam and I and being able to feed ourselves really wholesome, sustainable food. But I would personally not grow that for a market garden or for produce stores, because that would take away my passion and love for growing, because I would then have to grow it at a much larger scale. I would have to do it on a really regular basis and be really disciplined in that when I don't feel like that's within me or I'm prepared to do that. So by keeping my garden small enough for myself, my neighbors, friends to share with is for me manageable and allows me to be slow and sustained in that. And even with you with your flower farm, you spoke about, and I'll give you the chance to speak about it, about this year being your first year doing your flower farm. You've got certain types of plants that you're growing, and then you're planning on introducing others as the time is appropriate.
Yeah, like everything, you can either do everything at once and invest a lot of money into it, like building a house, growing a garden, everything like that. And same, goes for a business. You can either invest a lot of money at the get-go, which is something that I've decided not to do, and actually just start really small. Although I might not have a lot of flowers, it's still, in the long run, I'm never going to go into debt, which is my main thing that I don't want to do with the flowers. Yeah, so growing things like annuals, like zinnias, cosmos, a few dahlias, which I need a few in my garden.
Yeah.
But I don't want to put all of my energy and money into growing fields and fields of them, because it costs a lot of money from the get-go. So just creating manageable systems. I can just rely on the zinnias for now to hero the bouquets. And that's the same, like if you're growing food, you can just grow quick, fast annual crops rather than investing into fruit trees and berries and things like that, leaving that for down the track when you've actually got those other systems in place, like you've done your water management, you know where the sun is going to be, you've done your soil tests, rather than just planting them on day one, which I know a lot of people do because, you want trees in as soon as possible. Yeah. But sometimes it is good just to wait a little bit and have all those other systems in place that you've developed over time, to then reap the benefits.
And as you said, like that money that you then make from your first year of sales doing the annuals and the faster, quicker crops, you can then invest in your business, knowing that it's something you're passionate in, knowing your steps forward, and then being able to invest that money back when you have it, as opposed to going into debt trying to start off a new business. Because starting off new businesses takes a lot of money. People don't realize that a lot goes into it. And we're not going to go into it in this podcast episode. But like invest the money when you have it and slow down until you have that there.
Yeah, which is kind of a topic that permaculture doesn't discuss, and is something that it's not a problem with permaculture, but it's just something that I think is missing, is a lot of the realistic life things and things that happen in life that you have to do. So making money, there's not a lot in permaculture about how to factor that in, because that's just how our society works. And it would be great just to not have to, have a job and go to work every day. But it's something that I don't think the concept really covers a lot of.
Well, I think there's that assumption that if you're going to run a permaculture system, you instantly can become a teacher to teach it to others. Yeah. But that doesn't mean you have the skills to teach well.
No. Yeah.
So
we still need, like office jobs and things like that, and accountants and tax, whatever you do. Yeah. We need that in life. So I think there is a little bit of that separation between what's going on in the real world and the ideal life, which is a green, beautiful, like lovely garden that's
connected
all
with nature through and through.
Yeah. So I just wanted to bring that up again. That is, maybe lacking a little bit in some of these principles. But maybe we're not taking it the right way. So we'd love to know your opinion about that.
Again, and it is accept feedback and review things. There's always going to be, you got to take everything with a grain of salt and see how it applies in your life.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so principle number 10 is to use and value diversity. So diversity reduces vulnerability to a variety of threats and takes advantage of the unique nature of the environment in which it resides.
Yeah, and I think we've definitely touched on this one now. Yeah. Enough is integrating flowers, different types of plants, trees, shrubs, different levels in your garden, animals, if you decide to have animals in your systems, whether they're wild that you provide water baths for and safe places, or whether they're introduced like chickens and pigs that serve a purpose or contribute in other ways too.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose I don't know why I thought of this, but I suppose this principle, and I feel like I'm being complete like devil's advocate in this podcast. But
no, it's good. It's healthy to be
my
critical.
Brain. Yeah. I suppose sometimes there are things in nature and threats that, increasing diversity and everything like that, it's just not going to stop them. So things like natural disasters as well. Yeah. Applying this, sometimes you do need to have, like in Queensland, we needed to have certain components of the house and how it was built to be able to withstand cyclones. And I know in a lot of the US states, like the same thing for tornadoes. There's certain materials that do come from like either fossil fuels or something like that, where you need to meet building regulations.
Yeah, even around us with the bushfires that devastated the area a couple of years back now, like to build a house, the council requires you to log so many trees on your property just to build the house to begin with.
Yeah.
And then you have to use steel framing and everything. Your house has to be done in a certain way to actually qualify for any kind of, not registration, but building permits and all the things. DA.
Yeah, so while I think this really does apply to obviously the garden, when you're starting a homestead or building a house, I don't quite see this working with some of that. But it's definitely something that we do apply in our garden is biodiversity, and also just like having a diverse group of friends from different backgrounds and cultures is super important to know actually what goes on in the world and learn from people, because then you've got that knowledge and diversity of knowledge to be able to meet problems. And if you've got a shortage of food, you know how to create different recipes and all of that too.
But even if you just surround yourself with one type of person that always agrees with everything you do, you're no longer being challenged to try out different things or to really critically think of the decisions and choices you're making and be like, actually, maybe this isn't right, or actually maybe there is another way. Like if you're constantly around your yes men, then are you really growing as a person?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Permaculture principle number 11.
All right, second
I'm
last.
conscious of time, so
we'll wrap it up soon.
use the edges and value the marginal. So it describes this as the interface between things is where the most interesting events take place. These are often the most valuable, diverse, and productive elements in the system. Edges and margins.
Interesting. I just think science-wise in this one.
Oh, really?
And like,
what do you mean?
When like different areas like riparian areas or things where water meets land, there's always so much biodiversity.
Yeah, right.
That's what I think, but that's just because I have ecology background.
I love that.
And just like edge effects, being near a road, there's more weeds. There's just things going on when you have a break in one type of land use with the next.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm trying to think of how this relates to like people, but
well, to me personally, for me this one, this year I've experimented with, instead of putting wood chips straight onto my garden beds, putting them into the pathways instead of my garden, to smother out weeds and begin that composting cycle in the pathways has been really cool. But it's also things like the side of our road. So we've got our garden beds and our property, and then we have this huge section of nothing but weeds in front of the road. But we know that we don't spray and no one else sprays on our side of the road. So taking advantage of dandelion flowers, and this autumn time I'll be harvesting roots and turning them into teas. But it's using those spaces as part of your garden as well, and part of your environment, as opposed to just kind of leaving them to be on their own.
Yeah. And I think that where we have permaculture zones is a major thing. There's all of these different zones, which we could talk about again in another podcast, but is to have the things that you use most next to your house, but not neglecting the, outside edges of your property by planting fruit trees and other, native trees for birds and nature, rather than just leaving it and just kind of mowing the grass and keeping it at bay, actually using that space.
It's just not neglecting areas that would otherwise be neglected.
Yeah. But I find it interesting, this one, about the interface between it's where things happen.
Yeah.
They're talking about.
I think it's more so realizing that things are happening there. It's not just dead zones.
Yeah, and not just leaving it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in nature, that is what happens. There's a lot of interesting things that happen between.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As you said, with between the rivers and the land.
Yeah. And I suppose it's a way to also collect resources if you're on the edge of an area. And, you can either collect the water or nutrients, just making the most of outside areas in your property. And that's where soil tests are a great thing to know what's going on.
Yeah, I guess that is one that is quite broad that maybe we don't use as often, and is definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
Lucky last.
Cool. Okay, the last one. Principle number 12 is to creatively use and respond to change. We can have a positive impact on inevitable change by carefully observing and then intervening at the right time.
Yeah. And again, this just kind of brings all the principles together and just brings you back to keep observing, keep noticing what you're doing and how it impacts the land around. And, you know, don't expect that one choice that you've made will always be the choice that you're happy with. So it goes back to waste. Like one decision or one product that you've changed to might be sustainable at one point of your life, but might not be another time. And it's okay to make those changes if you need.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about this one is just all about common sense. Like, I think we as humans really have lost the ability to live alongside nature a lot of the time. And it is common sense to do that because we come back to that all the time. Like, we literally grow our food in the soil. We depend on nature and natural systems that happen. And I think as a collective, we will start moving that way again and, you know, realizing again how important green spaces are and how important trees, how they make us feel. We will move towards that. And this is all about, you know, having a positive impact on that inevitable change, which is what we will probably move towards. And I don't know, I think we've even done that with this podcast, just talking about that and talking about how we implement it in our garden. We'd love to also hear from you, how you implement permaculture principles in the garden.
Whether you believe in permaculture or whether there's another method that you believe more strongly in or kind of resonate more with. Yeah. So let us know on Instagram or down in the comments below whether permaculture forms a big part of what you do in your garden, whether it has in the past or will in the future. And if you are feeling so generous to leave us a review for the podcast, that would be so lovely. We always enjoy reading them out.
We do. We also have a Buy Me a Coffee page where you can buy us coffee or tea or just help us out financially to run this podcast and make the drives. It is quite a drive to each of our place and we make the effort to come together and have a chat and produce these episodes for you all. And it's just a way to say thanks if you would like to do that.
Yeah, but because if you haven't noticed, we don't have any ads on our videos at the moment. So these podcasts are a passion project that we are putting out there. So that support really does help us to move forward.
Yeah, but you can either, if you can't do that, supporting us just by liking and commenting and getting these podcasts out there. We would love to see you share them, or if you have a photo of you listening to them in the garden or preserving or anything, that would be amazing to see.
Yeah, we'd love that interaction with you all.
Yeah.
So hopefully you enjoyed today's episode and it's been enlightening or has just helped you to kind of step back and think about the decisions and the choices you're making in your own garden, to listen to feedback and also know how to give it to someone else in the right way.
Exactly. Positive change.
Yes, that's right.
Awesome. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.